My sister dumped 5 gallons of industrial red paint on my 6-year-old daughter for a TikTok trend. Then my mother hissed, "You are ruining the party," as I smashed my sister's phone to pieces. Nobody stood up for me. Nobody asked if my child was okay. They wanted a show, so a few days later, I gave them an ending they never saw coming. My name is Nia, and at 32 years old, I have built an empire that protects the biggest names in Atlanta. But to my family, I am just the failed paralegal sister who could never quite catch up to the golden child. Last Saturday, I made the mistake of bringing my daughter Zola to my sister Keisha's 30th birthday celebration. It was supposed to be an elegant garden party at my parents' sprawling estate in Buckhead. The lawn was manicured to perfection, and white tents dotted the property, while a jazz quartet played softly near the champagne tower. My sister Keisha, a self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer with 2 million followers, was the center of attention in a shimmering gold dress that cost more than my first car. I held Zola's hand tightly as we navigated the crowd. My daughter struggles with social anxiety, and the loud chatter was already making her tremble. But then Keisha beamed that plastic smile at us. "Zola, baby, come here, Auntie has a special surprise for you right center stage." I hesitated. My stomach churned with that familiar instinct to run, but my mother Beatrice appeared at my elbow, her fingers digging into my arm. "Do not be difficult. Nia, let the girl go. It is your sister's big moment. Do not make a scene." Against my better judgment, I let Zola walk toward the small platform decorated with balloons. Keisha held up her phone, the ring light reflecting in her eyes like a predator. "Say cheese for the fans, Zola." Before I could take a step forward, Keisha pulled a silk ribbon attached to the trellis above. I expected confetti. I expected glitter. Instead, a heavy bucket rigged above the flowers tipped over. A thick, viscous wave of bright red paint crashed down on my 6-year-old daughter. The sound was sickening, a wet, heavy slap followed by absolute silence from the crowd. Then came the scream. It was a sound no mother should ever hear, a primal shriek of terror and pain as the heavy chemical paint stung her eyes and coated her skin. I dropped my purse and sprinted toward the stage, my heart hammering against my ribs. But Keisha did not help. She did not gasp. She stepped closer, thrusting her iPhone camera inches from my sobbing child's face. "Oh my God, look at that reaction. We are going viral. Zola, look at the camera. This is pure gold." She was laughing. My sister was laughing at my daughter's trauma, while the guests pulled out their phones to record the humiliation. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect a loved one from toxic family members who cared more about appearances than people. The red paint dripped from Zola's chin like fresh blood staining her white Sunday dress. Through the haze of my own panic, I saw Keisha adjust the angle of her phone to get better lighting on my daughter's tears. That was the moment something inside me snapped. It was not a decision I made consciously. It was a primal switch flipping in the deepest part of my brain. My vision tunneled until the only thing I could see was that device recording my child's humiliation. I did not walk up the stairs of the gazebo. I stormed them. The expensive heels I wore dug into the wood, but I felt nothing. Keisha was too busy checking her livestream viewer count to notice the hurricane coming her way. She was laughing, saying something about engagement numbers, when my hand clamped around her wrist. I did not grip it gently. I squeezed with the strength of 30 years of suppressed rage. Keisha gasped, dropping her influencer smile instantly. "Hey, let go, you are hurting me," she whined, trying to pull away. I did not say a word. I did not negotiate. I ripped the titanium device from her hand with enough force to snap one of her acrylic nails. For a split second, she looked at me in total confusion. She had never seen me fight back. She had never seen the sister who took the abuse actually stand up. I raised the phone high above my head. The afternoon sun glinted off the camera lenses that had just violated my daughter's privacy. With a guttural exhale, I hurled the device down onto the slate pavers of the patio. Crack! The sound was violent and satisfying. It sounded like a gunshot echoing across the manicured lawn. The glass backing shattered instantly, sending shards skittering across the stone like diamonds. The screen flickered once, a final glitch of static, before going completely black. The titanium frame bent under the impact. Silence slammed into the party harder than the phone hit the ground. The jazz band stopped playing mid-note. Waiters froze with trays of hors d'oeuvres held in mid-air. 200 guests stood like statues, their champagne flutes halfway to their mouths. The only sound remaining in the entire estate was the wet dripping of paint falling from Zola's dress onto the floorboards. Keisha stared at the wreckage of her digital life scattered on the ground. Her eyes bulged. She fell to her knees not to check on her niece, but to frantically gather the broken pieces of glass. Her hands were shaking. "You are crazy!" Keisha screamed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek that made the guests flinch. "You are absolutely psychotic, Nia. That is the new iPhone Pro Max. Do you know how much that costs? You just destroyed my footage. You are jealous because I am the star, and you are nothing." She looked up at me from the ground, face twisted in ugly entitlement. She was more worried about a $1,000 piece of technology than the fact that my daughter was shivering and covered in chemicals. I stood over her, my chest heaving. My hands were empty now, but I felt heavier than before. The adrenaline was coursing through my veins, making my fingertips tingle. For the first time in my life, I looked down at my golden sister, and I did not feel envy. I felt nothing but cold disgust. Before I could even catch my breath from the exertion of destroying the phone, my mother was on me. Beatrice did not run to her 6-year-old granddaughter who was gasping for air through a mask of chemical red sludge. Instead, she lunged at me. She shoved my shoulder with both hands, her face twisted into a snarl that exposed her expensive veneers. I stumbled back, trying to regain my balance on the slippery slate patio. "Have you lost your damn mind?" Beatrice hissed. Her voice was low and venomous, meant only for me, but loud enough for the front row to hear. "You come into my house, eat my food, and then destroy your sister's property. Do you know how hard she works for this content? Do you know how much planning went into this day? You are acting like a wild animal." I stood there stunned, not by the physical aggression, but by the absolute blindness of it. My father Desmond was already on his knees. He was not checking Zola for injuries or trying to wipe the paint from her eyes. He was cradling the shattered remains of the iPhone like it was a wounded soldier. He picked up a piece of the broken screen and looked up at me with profound disappointment in his eyes. "This was unnecessary, Nia," he said, shaking his head slowly. "We are having a celebration. We have guests from the country club here. Why do you always have to be so dramatic? Why do you always have to make everything about you?" The gaslighting was almost impressive in its cruelty. My daughter was standing 3 feet away, shivering violently as the thick paint began to dry and tighten on her skin. She was emitting low, hiccuping sobs, rubbing her eyes with paint-covered fists, but neither of my parents cast a single glance in her direction. Keisha was hyperventilating, fake tears streaming down her face, and my mother immediately wrapped her arms around her. "It is okay, baby," Beatrice cooed, stroking Keisha's hair while glaring at me. "We will fix it. Your sister is just bitter. She has always been jealous of your shine. She cannot stand to see you successful, so she has to break things." Desmond stood up, dusting off his knees. He pointed a manicured finger at my chest, ignoring the fact that his granddaughter was whimpering in pain just inches from his leg. "You are going to pay for this, Nia," he announced loudly, ensuring the crowd could hear his authority. "You are going to replace that device immediately, and you are going to apologize to the guests for ruining the mood. Look at the mess you made." He gestured to the red puddle on the floor. He was talking about the stains on his expensive patio tiles. He was not talking about the assault on my child. In that moment, looking at my father worry about his flooring while my daughter suffered, I realized that I did not have parents. I had enemies. Just when I thought the humiliation could not get worse. Brad stepped forward from the VIP tent. My brother-in-law walked with the unearned confidence of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. He was wearing a cream-colored linen suit that probably cost more than my rent, and he held a crystal tumbler of scotch in one hand. He did not look at my 6-year-old niece who was still wiping toxic red paint from her eyelashes. He did not look at the mess on the floor. His pale blue eyes locked onto me with a look I knew well. It was the look one gives to a clumsy waitress who has just dropped a tray. It was a look of absolute superior disgust. Brad stepped carefully over the puddle of red paint, ensuring his Italian loafers remained spotless. He did not ask if Zola was okay. He did not ask why his wife was screaming. He simply walked over to where the shattered remains of the iPhone lay and nudged a piece of glass with the toe of his shoe. Then he looked up at me and sighed as if I were an unruly child he had to discipline. Nia. I honestly expected better even from you, Brad said, his voice calm and dripping with condescension. He took a slow sip of his drink. You know we invited you here out of pity, right? We wanted you to see how the other half lives. We wanted you to experience a bit of culture and class. And this is how you repay our generosity, by acting like a savage in front of my business partners. I felt my blood boiling beneath my skin. My fists were clenched so tight my nails were digging into my palms. You call this class, Brad? I asked, my voice trembling with rage. Your wife just assaulted my daughter for internet views. Brad laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Assault is a very strong word, Nia. It was a prank. It was a joke. Something you clearly do not have the intellectual capacity to understand. But property damage. Now that is something I understand very well. He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and old money arrogance. Do you have any idea what you just destroyed? He whispered, leaning in so only I could hear. That is a customized terabyte model with professional lenses. That phone costs more than that dented Honda Civic you drove here in. You just destroyed an asset that is worth more than your monthly salary. He pulled back and looked around the room, performing for the audience. I want an apology, Nia. Right now. I want you to get on your knees, pick up every single piece of that glass, and apologize to my wife for ruining her big day. And after you clean up this mess, you are going to sign a promissory note for the damages. Or do I need to call the police and have you escorted out in handcuffs for destruction of private property? I looked at my parents. They were nodding in agreement. I looked at Keisha. She was smirking behind her tears. I looked at Brad, standing there like a king in his ivory tower. They truly believed I was powerless. They truly believed I was just the poor, unfortunate sister who would bow down. But as I looked at Brad's smug face, I realized something. He did not know who I really was. He did not know that the Honda Civic was a disguise. He did not know that I could buy and sell his entire trust fund before breakfast. I took a deep breath. I picked up Zola, who was still sobbing softly. I did not scream. I did not fight. I looked Brad dead in the eye and spoke with a deadly calm. I am not apologizing, Brad. And you better hope that phone was worth it, because it is going to cost you everything. I did not give Brad the satisfaction of an answer. There was no point in arguing with a man whose ego was inflated by a trust fund and the belief that he owned the world. I turned my back on him, which was the ultimate disrespect in his eyes. I crouched down to Zola's level, ignoring the paint that was pooling around her little patent leather shoes. Come here, baby, I whispered. I lifted my 6-year-old daughter into my arms. She was heavy with grief, and the thick chemical paint smeared instantly onto my vintage silk blouse. I did not care about the clothes. I only cared about shielding her face from the vultures surrounding us. As I carried her toward the exit, we had to walk a gauntlet of humiliation. This was the moment Keisha's friends had been waiting for. They were influencers and clout chasers hungry for content. Phones were raised like weapons. I heard the shutter sounds. I saw the flashes. A girl named Chloe, who had eaten at my dinner table just last Thanksgiving, snapped a picture and laughed loud enough for me to hear. Looks like the trash is taking itself out, she jeered. The crowd chuckled. My mother did not scold her. My father did not defend his daughter. They just stood there watching us leave, relieved that the embarrassment was finally exiting their manicured lawn. Every step away from that terrace felt like shedding a heavy skin. I felt Zola's hot tears soaking into my neck. She was trembling, not from the cold, but from the cruelty. In that long walk to the driveway, I made a silent vow that vibrated through my entire body. This was the last time. This was the absolutely last time my daughter would ever set foot on this property. I was done seeking their validation. I was done playing the role of the grateful poor relation. They wanted a villain, so I would become the villain. But I would be the kind of villain that owned the bank that held their mortgage. We reached my dented Honda Civic parked shamefully between a Bentley and a Porsche. I buckled Zola into her car seat, her sticky red hands clinging to her seatbelt. "Mama? Why do they hate me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. My heart shattered into dust. "They do not hate you, baby," I said, starting the engine. "They just do not know that we are about to change the game." I backed out of the driveway, leaving tire marks on their perfect asphalt, and I did not look back. The drive back to my modest two-bedroom apartment was a blur of silence and suppressed rage. I kept checking the rearview mirror to make sure Zola was okay, but she had fallen into a restless sleep, clutching her seatbelt like a lifeline. When we finally walked through the door of the rental unit, I deliberately kept simple to lower my family's expectations. The first thing I did was run a warm bath. I spent the next 45 minutes gently scrubbing industrial red paint from my daughter's skin. The water turned a horrifying shade of crimson, swirling down the drain like a scene from a horror movie. Zola did not speak. She just let me wash the chemicals from her hair, her eyes vacant and distant. It broke me. Every scrub of the washcloth was a reminder of my failure to protect her from the people who were supposed to love us. Once Zola was tucked into bed with a cup of warm milk and her favorite stuffed rabbit, I collapsed onto the worn beige sofa in the living room. My hands were stained pink and trembling. I reached for my phone, intending to call my private security team to blacklist my parents' number. But before I could unlock the screen, a barrage of notifications nearly froze the device. Ping, ping, ping. The sound was continuous, a digital machine gun fire that did not stop. I opened Instagram, and my stomach dropped through the floor. Keisha had been busy. At the very top of my feed was a video posted just 2 hours ago. It already had 1.2 million views. The thumbnail was a freeze frame of my face contorted in anger, right as I raised the phone to smash it. The caption read, "My own sister attacked me on my birthday. Heartbroken. Hashtag family drama. Hashtag jealousy. Hashtag survivor." I pressed play, my breath catching in my throat. The video was a masterclass in manipulation. Keisha had edited out the entire beginning. There was no footage of the paint bucket, no footage of Zola screaming, no footage of the crowd laughing. The video started exactly at the millisecond I grabbed Keisha's wrist. To the world, it looked like I had charged the stage unprovoked, like a deranged lunatic to destroy a sweet, innocent girl's moment. I scrolled down to the comments and felt bile rise in my throat. "She needs to be arrested," wrote one user with a verified checkmark. "This is what happens when you let trash into a classy event," wrote another. "Look at her eyes, she is totally unhinged. I hope you sued her for that phone." Thousands of strangers were dissecting my character based on a lie. They called me bitter. They called me aggressive. They called me a danger to society. My sister had successfully weaponized the internet against me in less time than it took to drive home. She had turned her cruelty into content, and I was the villain of the week. I threw my phone onto the cushion beside me. My first instinct was to scream, to reply to every single comment and tell the truth. But then I remembered who I was. I remembered what I did for a living. I fixed problems like this for Fortune 500 CEOs. I destroyed false narratives for breakfast. Keisha thought she had won the war because she won the first battle. She thought this video would shame me into submission. But all she had really done was leave a digital footprint of her own defamation. I looked at the dark screen and a cold calm settled over me. If she wanted to play the villain, I would show her exactly how a mastermind operates. Monday morning arrived with a heaviness that felt physical. I dressed Zola in her navy blue uniform, hoping the routine of school would provide some normalcy after the chaos of the weekend. But as soon as we pulled into the circular drop-off lane at St. Jude Academy, the atmosphere shifted. Usually, other mothers would wave or smile from their SUVs. Today, car windows were rolled up tight. Eyes were averted. I walked Zola to the entrance, her small hand gripping mine so hard her knuckles turned white. We approached a group of girls Zola usually played with during recess. Zola offered a hesitant wave. "Hi, Madison," she whispered. The girl looked at Zola, then looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. Her mother yanked her back as if we were contagious. "Do not talk to them, Madison," the mother hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Her mother is the crazy lady from the internet." A boy standing near the lockers pointed a finger. "Look, it is the monster's child." Laughter rippled through the hallway. Zola shrank behind my legs, burying her face in my coat. My blood ran cold. These were 6-year-olds repeating the poison their parents had fed them over breakfast. Before I could address the mother or comfort my daughter, the school secretary appeared. She did not smile. "Ms. Johnson, Principal Davis needs to see you immediately. Please come this way." I was marched into the office like a delinquent. Principal Davis, a woman who smiled too much, but never with her eyes, sat behind her mahogany desk. On her computer screen, paused in high definition, was Keisha's video. The freeze frame showed my face contorted in rage, my arm raised to smash the phone. It looked indefensible. "Ms. Johnson, this is a place of learning and safety." Principal Davis began without offering me a seat. "We have received 12 emails this morning from concerned parents. They do not feel comfortable having their children associate with a family involved in violent domestic disturbances." I stared at her in disbelief. "A violent disturbance? My daughter was the one assaulted." I said, my voice steady but cold. "That video is edited. My sister dumped industrial paint on my child. I was protecting her." Principal Davis sighed, adjusting her rimless glasses. "Perception is reality, Ms. Johnson. In this video you look unhinged, you look dangerous. We have a strict code of conduct for parents as well as students. If you cannot control your temper, perhaps St. Jude is not the right environment for Zola. We cannot have a disruptive element threatening the harmony of our community. She was threatening to expel my daughter because I broke a phone. She was judging my entire motherhood based on a 30-second clip edited by a narcissist." I looked around the office at the awards for character and integrity hanging on the walls. I realized then that truth did not matter to these people. Only image mattered. And right now, my image was destroyed. I had to get Zola out of there before they broke her spirit completely. "I will take my daughter home today," I said quietly. "But do not think this conversation is over." I drove away from St. Jude Academy with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. In the rearview mirror, Zola stared out the window, her small face devoid of the joy that usually defined her. Seeing my daughter treated like a criminal because of my sister's lies ignited a fire in my belly that felt dangerous. I was ready to burn the whole world down to keep her warm. But then the Bluetooth system in my car buzzed, interrupting the heavy silence. "Incoming call. Dad." I stared at the dashboard screen. My first instinct was to ignore it. I wanted to block them all, to disappear into the life I had built outside their toxic orbit. But a small, foolish part of me hesitated. This was my father. Maybe he had heard about the school. Maybe the reality of his granddaughter being ostracized had finally pierced through his narcissism. Surely there was a line even they would not cross. I pressed the answer button. "Hello, Dad. Nia." His voice was deep and surprisingly calm, devoid of the shouting I expected. "Beatrice told me you took Zola out of school early. We heard about the principal. This has gone too far. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. Finally, acknowledgement. Yes, Dad, it has. Keisha's video is ruining Zola's life. She is 6 years old, and she is being bullied by adults because of a lie. There was a pause on the other end. I want you to come over tonight, Nia. Just you. Leave Zola with a sitter. We need to sit down as a family and resolve this. We need to settle this like adults, before it causes any more damage to our reputation. Reputation. The word stung, but I chose to ignore it. I focused on the phrase, settle this. For a brief, shining moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe they were going to make Keisha take the video down. Maybe they were going to apologize. Maybe they finally realized that their golden child had become a monster. The little girl inside me who just wanted her father to protect her rose to the surface, pushing down the rational businesswoman who knew better. Okay, I said, my voice softer than I intended. I will drop Zola off at Mrs. Higgins' house and come over. Good, Desmond said. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. The line went dead. I felt a surge of relief mixed with anxiety. I drove Zola to her favorite babysitter, a warm, older woman who actually knew how to bake cookies without live streaming it. I kissed my daughter's forehead and promised her that everything would be fixed by tomorrow. I truly believed it. I believed that tonight would be the turning point where my parents finally stepped up. As I pulled my Honda up the long, winding driveway of my parents' estate, the house loomed large against the twilight sky. The windows were glowing with warm golden light, looking like the perfect picture of domestic bliss. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired but determined. I was walking into the lion's den, but I thought I was there to sign a peace treaty. I had no idea I was walking straight into an ambush. I stepped out of the car, straightened my spine, and walked to the front door, believing that for once we were going to act like a real family. I was so incredibly wrong. The atmosphere inside the living room was colder than the night air outside. I expected a conversation. I expected my mother to be crying, or my father to be pacing the floor with a lecture about family unity. Instead, I walked into a tribunal. Beatrice and Desmond sat stiffly on the cream-colored velvet sofa, looking like statues of disapproval. They did not stand up to greet me. They did not ask how Zola was doing. They simply stared at the empty spot on the coffee table as if waiting for the proceedings to begin. Brad was standing by the marble fireplace, swirling the ice in his Scotch glass. He looked at me with that same bored arrogance he had displayed at the party. There was no rage in his eyes, only calculation. He did not say hello. He did not offer me a seat. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a folded sheet of thick legal paper. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it onto the glass table. It slid across the surface with a hiss, stopping exactly at the toes of my sneakers. "Read it," Brad commanded, taking a slow sip of his drink. I bent down and picked up the document. It was not a handwritten note. It was a formal invoice printed on heavy bond paper, complete with a letterhead that read Bradley J. Worthington III. I scanned the lines and felt the breath leave my lungs. It was an itemized list of damages. Item 1. Replacement of custom communication device, $1,500. Item 2. Expedited data recovery services, $2,000. Item 3. Loss of potential revenue due to interrupted live stream, $3,000. My eyes widened as I reached the bottom of the list. Item 4. Emotional distress and trauma counseling for Keisha Worthington, $4,000. The total at the bottom was bold and underlined, $10,500. I looked up from the paper, trembling with disbelief. "Is this a joke?" I asked, my voice echoing in the silent room. "You want me to pay $4,000 for Keisha's emotional distress? She is the one who dumped paint on my child. Zola is the one having nightmares." My father finally spoke. His voice was tired, as if dealing with me was an exhausting burden he had carried for too long. "Nia, be reasonable. You destroyed property. You caused a scene. Keisha has been unable to work for 2 days because she is so upset. That is real money lost. This is a fair settlement. Fair, I repeated. I looked at my mother, hoping to see a flicker of maternal instinct. Mom, surely you see how insane this is. Beatrice smoothed her skirt, avoiding my eyes. Brad is being very generous, Nia. He could have called the police. He could have sued you for assault. Paying this bill is the only way to make things right. It is the only way to show us that you are sorry for your behavior. Brad stepped forward, his shadow falling over me. We know you do not have this kind of cash lying around in that little apartment of yours, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. So we have prepared a payment plan. You will sign a promissory note today. $500 a month for the next 2 years, including interest, of course. He smiled a shark-like grin. Consider it a lesson in responsibility, Nia. Maybe next time you will think twice before you act like a savage in polite society. I looked at the paper in my hand. It was not just a bill. It was a leash. They wanted to chain me to them with debt to keep me under their thumb for 2 more years. They wanted to monetize my humiliation. I looked at the 3 of them sitting in their expensive house, demanding money from the daughter they thought was poor. They had no idea that I could write a check for this entire house right now and not even notice the funds leaving my account. But I was not going to pay them. I was going to make them pay. Brad leaned back against the marble fireplace mantel, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and amusement that made my skin crawl. The silence in the room was heavy, but Brad seemed to enjoy it. He treated the moment like a lecture hall where he was the professor and I was the failing student who needed remedial lessons in life. You have to understand, Naya, that we are trying to help you here. Brad began, his voice smooth and dangerously calm. We know that finances are likely a struggle for you. It is not your fault, really. Some people are just not built for the complexities of wealth management. We know you did not attend a top-tier university like Keisha did. Community college has its merits, I suppose, but it does not prepare you for the real world. It certainly does not prepare you to understand the value of high-end assets. He took a slow sip of his scotch, his eyes scanning my outfit. I was wearing high-quality streetwear, but to him it probably looked like bargain bin clearance. I did some calculations based on the average salary of a paralegal in this city. Brad continued, walking slowly toward me. After rent and whatever car payments you have on that Honda, I imagine $10,000 is an impossible sum. It is probably more than you have ever seen in your bank account at one time. That is why the payment plan is a mercy, Nia. We are structuring this so you do not have to declare bankruptcy. We are trying to teach you fiscal responsibility, something that people from your background often lack. My background. The phrase hung in the air like a toxic cloud. We grew up in the same house, but Brad was drawing a line. He was implying that I was ghetto, that I was uneducated, that I was lesser. He was using the polite language of the country club to call me trash. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to object. My father, Desmond, had worked his way up from nothing. He knew what it was like to be judged by men like Brad. But Desmond just nodded his head in agreement. Brad is right, Nia, my father said, refusing to meet my eyes. You have always been impulsive with money. You need to learn that actions have financial consequences. You cannot just break things because you are emotional. That is not how civilized people behave. My mother Beatrice chimed in from the sofa. We just want you to grow up, Naya. Keisha has a brand to protect. She has investors. You have a job. A job that barely covers your bills, I am sure. Just sign the paper. Brad is doing you a favor by not involving the authorities. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. They actually believed this. They believed I was the charity case. They believed I was the screw-up. Brad was standing there lecturing me about money when I had closed a deal this morning worth more than his entire inheritance. He talked about my education as if I had not graduated summa cum laude from law school under a different name to avoid their scrutiny. Brad held out a gold-plated fountain pen. It glinted under the chandelier light. Sign it, Nia, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Sign it, and we can put this ugly business behind us. Show us that you are capable of being an adult for once in your life. Do not make us treat you like a criminal. I looked at the pen. I looked at his smug face. I looked at my parents who had sold me out for proximity to whiteness and wealth. They wanted me to be small. They wanted me to be in debt to them so they could control me. I reached out and took the pen. My hand was steady. I was not signing a confession. In my mind, I was signing their warrant. I let my shoulders slump forward in a posture of absolute defeat. To them, I looked like a broken woman realizing she had finally hit a wall she could not climb. To me, I looked like a hunter laying the final leaves over a tiger trap. I made sure my hand trembled visibly as I held the gold fountain pen. I bit my lip hard enough to draw a speck of blood, adding a touch of physical distress to my performance. Please, Brad. I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. $500 is my grocery budget for the whole month. I do not know how I will feed Zola if I pay this. Can we not work something else out? Please, I am begging you. Brad chuckled. The sound was wet and self-satisfied. He exchanged a look with my father, a look that said, "See, I told you she would break." He stepped closer, enjoying the smell of my fear, not realizing it was artificial. That is not my problem, Nia, Brad said, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. If you cannot feed your kid, maybe you should not have destroyed my property. Maybe you should get a second job. I hear the cleaning crew at my office is hiring. I reached into the pocket of my hoodie, pretending to search for a tissue to wipe my eyes. In that split second of distraction while they watched me sniffle, I pressed the volume down button on my phone 3 times rapidly. It was a shortcut I had programmed years ago for hostile boardroom negotiations. The voice recorder app silently roared to life, capturing every frequency in the room. I need to understand exactly what happens if I do not sign this, I said, speaking clearly and directing my voice toward my pocket. I want the recording to be crystal clear for the judge. Brad took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. He straightened his tie, puffing out his chest. If you do not sign that paper right now, I pick up this phone and call the sheriff. I tell him you assaulted my wife and vandalized my home. With my family connections and your lack of resources, you will be in a holding cell by midnight. And good luck keeping custody of your daughter with an assault charge on your record. I mentally checked the box. Extortion, coercion, threat of false imprisonment. It was all there, recorded in high-definition audio. Okay, I said, letting a single tear fall. You win. I will sign. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly as I wrote my name. I did not sign with my usual confident flourish. I made the signature shaky and small, the mark of a desperate person. I handed the paper back to Brad, who snatched it like a trophy. Smart choice, Nia, my mother said from the couch. She sounded relieved that she would not have to visit me in jail. It would have been so embarrassing for her bridge club friends to find out. Now get out, Brad said, tucking the paper into his jacket pocket. And do not be late with the first payment. I charge late fees. I turned and walked toward the heavy oak door. I kept my head down until I stepped out into the cool night air. As soon as the door clicked shut behind me, I pulled the phone from my pocket and stopped the recording. I saved the file under the name Exhibit A. I wiped the fake tears from my face and replaced them with a smile that would have terrified them if they could see it. They thought they had just secured a payday. In reality, they had just signed their own confession. I walked down the long, winding driveway of my childhood home, feeling the gravel crunch beneath my cheap sneakers. I did not look back at the illuminated windows where my family was likely celebrating their victory over me. To them, I was a defeated woman walking home to a life of poverty and struggle. To them, I was Nia, the failure, the disappointment, the sister who needed a payment plan to survive. I made sure to keep my head down and my shoulders slumped until I was certain I was out of their line of sight. I maintained the character of the beaten dog until the very last second because I knew how much they loved that narrative. I reached the street where my rusted Honda Civic was parked under a flickering street lamp. It was a magnificent prop, I had bought it from a junkyard 3 years ago, specifically for visits to this house. It completed the illusion they were so desperate to believe. But tonight, I did not take the keys out of my pocket. I did not unlock the door of that sad little car. Instead, I walked right past it. I walked 50 yards down the road to a secluded cul-de-sac where the shadows were deep and impenetrable, shielded by a row of ancient oak trees. As I stepped into the darkness, a pair of headlights flicked on, cutting through the gloom like lasers. The engine purred a low, guttural growl that sounded nothing like a four-cylinder Honda. It was the distinctive hum of a twin-turbo V12 engine. The rear door of the obsidian black Maybach S-Class swung open before I even reached the handle. Marcus, my head of security and personal driver, stepped out from the shadows. He was a mountain of a man, in an immaculate black suit wearing an earpiece that connected him to my real world. He looked at my hoodie and the tear stains I had artfully left on my cheeks, but his expression remained professional. He knew the game. He knew that for the last 3 hours, I had been undercover in my own life, playing a role that won Oscars in the living room of my parents' house. "Good evening, Ms. Johnson," Marcus said, his voice a deep rumble of respect. He extended a hand to help me into the vehicle. Did the meeting go according to plan? I slid into the back seat. The interior smelled of Italian leather and expensive success. I kicked off the cheap sneakers I wore for my mother's benefit and rested my feet on the plush carpet. I pulled my phone out and stopped the recording that was still running in the background. "Better than planned, Marcus," I replied, my voice stripping away the tremble I had faked for Brad. "They gave me everything I needed. They practically handed me the murder weapon and signed the confession." Marcus closed the door, shutting out the noise of the suburbs. The silence inside the cabin was instant and luxurious. He slid into the driver's seat and looked at me through the rear-view mirror, waiting for orders. "Where to, ma'am?" Marcus asked. "Back to the penthouse, or should I drive you to the hotel to see Zola?" I looked out the tinted window at the direction of my parents' house one last time. I thought about the invoice in my pocket. I thought about Brad's smirk. I thought about the war I was about to unleash. "No, Marcus," I said, a cold smile playing on my lips. "Take me to Onyx Shield headquarters, wake up the legal team, and tell them to meet me in the war room. We have a contract to write." The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Sovereign building with a brilliance that blinded most people on the street below. But from my corner office on the 40th floor, the city of Atlanta looked like a game board that I had already won. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, sipping an espresso that cost more than the shoes I had worn to my parents' house the night before. Here I was, not Nia, the struggling single mother. Here I was, the silent majority shareholder of Onyx Shield, the most ruthless reputation management firm in the South. My office was a fortress of solitude and power. Minimalist Italian furniture, slick marble surfaces, and a silence that commanded respect. The door opened and David, my lead forensic accountant, walked in. He did not knock. We did not have time for pleasantries when we were hunting. He placed a thick black dossier on my desk with a heavy thud. "You were right," David said, adjusting his glasses. "The Emperor has no clothes, and neither does his wife." I walked over to the desk and flipped open the file. It was a financial autopsy of Bradley Worthington and my sister Keisha. I expected to find wealth. I expected to find that their cruelty was born from boredom. But what I found was far more interesting. I found desperation. "They are bleeding cash," David explained, pointing to a series of red graphs. "Brad likes to brag about the Worthington family money, but his trust fund is strictly controlled. He gets a stipend on the first of the year. He burned through his entire annual allowance by March, buying that vacation home in Cabo. Since then, they have been living entirely on credit." I ran my finger down the column of debts. It was staggering. The Bentley SUV they drove to the party was 3 months behind on payments. The Amex Black Card Brad flashed around like a badge of honor was maxed out with a balance of $80,000. "And Keisha?" I asked, looking up. "She claims she makes 6 figures from brand deals," David scoffed. "Smoke and mirrors. She buys her followers. Her engagement rate is less than 1%. She has not booked a paid partnership in 6 months. Most of the products she unboxes on TikTok are things she bought herself and pretended were gifts. She is hemorrhaging money trying to look rich. I stared at the numbers and everything suddenly clicked into place. The aggression, the demand for the $10,000, the payment plan. They were not just trying to humiliate me, they were trying to survive. They were drowning and they saw me as a quick cash grab to pay off the interest on their credit cards. They needed that money to stop the repo man from taking the Bentley. I closed the file and a cold smile spread across my face. They were not powerful enemies. They were cornered rats, and everyone knows that rats will eat anything if they are hungry enough. David, I said, looking at the financial ruin of the people who had tormented my daughter. They need a miracle. They need a big payday to save face. David nodded, understanding exactly where I was going. We have the new subsidiary ready to launch. Beauty X. We need a face for the brand. Perfect, I said. Let us offer them a contract. Make the numbers so big they cannot refuse. Make them think they have won the lottery. Because when they reach for that bait, I am going to make sure the hook goes right through their jaw. I swiveled my leather chair around to face the team assembled in the war room. Elena, my director of marketing, sat with her tablet poised ready to execute the most expensive prank in corporate history. But this was not a joke. It was a tactical strike. We were about to weaponize my sister's own narcissism against her. I looked at the digital mock-ups of the campaign on the screen. The brand was BeautyX, a high-end subsidiary I had acquired 6 months ago. It was prestigious, exclusive, and exactly the kind of label Keisha would kill to be associated with. Elena, I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the server towers. Send the proposal. Make sure the subject line screams validation. Use words like iconic muse and visionary. We need to bypass her critical thinking skills and go straight to her ego. Elena typed furiously. I have the contract draft ready, Miss Johnson. The compensation package is set at $250,000 for a 6-month exclusivity deal. $50,000 payable immediately upon signing as a signing bonus. I nodded. That $50,000 was the cheese in the mousetrap. It was enough to pay off their credit card debt, to fix the car, and to give them a false sense of security. It was enough money to make them feel rich again, which meant they would stop being cautious and start being reckless. And the clause I asked, is it buried deep enough? Page 42, Section C, Paragraph 4. Elena confirmed with a shark-like grin, the morality and conduct clause. It gives us the right to terminate the contract and demand full repayment plus damages if the ambassador engages in any behavior that brings public shame or disrepute to the brand. This includes but is not limited to bullying, harassment, discrimination, or acts of violence. I leaned back, steepling my fingers. Perfect. Keisha had built her entire online persona on being a mean girl. She could not go a week without starting a feud or pulling a prank. She would sign that contract without reading it because she was desperate for the money and addicted to the fame. She would see the $250,000 figure and go blind to everything else. Send it, I commanded. Elena hit send. Across town, in a house that was likely filled with tension and unpaid bills, a notification would be popping up on Keisha's new phone. I could almost picture the scene. The scream of excitement, the frantic call to Brad, the way they would look at each other and think that God had finally answered their prayers. They would think their luck had turned. They would think they were untouchable. They had no idea that the hand offering them salvation was attached to the same sister they had just tried to destroy. I watched the email status change to delivered. Now we wait. It usually took a sophisticated legal team days to review a contract this size. I gave them 10 minutes. Desperation does not read the fine print. Desperation just looks for the signature line. I took a sip of my sparkling water and watched the clock ticking down to their self-destruction. The trap was set, and the bait was irresistible. Across town, the mood inside Keisha and Brad's rental home was grim. The air conditioner was rattling, and a pile of unopened envelopes sat on the kitchen counter like a tombstone for their financial stability. Keisha was lying on the sofa, scrolling through her backup phone, frantically deleting negative comments about the paint incident. She looked haggard. The stress of the last 48 hours had cracked her perfect foundation. She was expecting another hate comment, or a bill collector, when the notification chime echoed through the silent hallway. She glanced at the screen expecting the worst. Instead, she saw the golden logo of Beauty X. The subject line read, "Proposal for Ms. Keisha Worthington, the new face of modern beauty." She sat up. She tapped the email. She read the first line. "We have been watching you." She read the second line. "You are the bold visionary we have been searching for." She read the third line. "Compensation package totaling $250,000. The scream that tore from her throat was not human. It was the sound of a drowning woman breaking the surface of the water. It was a shriek of pure, unadulterated validation. Brad dropped his glass of water in the kitchen and came running, his face pale, thinking she was hurt. Keisha shoved the phone in his face, her hands shaking violently. "Look, Brad, look. Read the numbers. They want me. They want me to be the face of their new luxury line. $250,000, Brad. 50,000 just for signing my name." Brad snatched the phone, his eyes scanning the text with predatory speed. He skipped the paragraphs about brand values and responsibilities. He went straight to the dollar signs, his face transformed from exhausted to euphoric in a heartbeat. The arrogance that Nia had seen the night before rushed back into his body, filling him with new life. He grabbed Keisha and spun her around, knocking over a stack of unpaid utility bills in the process. "I told you, babe," he shouted. "I told you that you were a star. This is it. This is the big leagues. We are going to be rich. We have to call Mom." Keisha shrieked, breathless with excitement. She dialed Beatrice on speakerphone, her fingers trembling. "Mom, you are never going to believe this. While Nia is trying to ruin my life with her little payment plans, the universe just handed me a crown. I just got a brand deal worth more than Nia's entire existence." Beatrice screamed on the other end of the line. "I knew it. I told your father that you were special. I told him that Nia's jealousy could not stop your destiny. Oh, honey, I am so proud of you. What did Nia say about you being broke?" She is going to choke on her words. They spent the next hour fantasizing. They talked about the vacation they would take to the Maldives. They talked about upgrading the Bentley. They laughed about how stupid Nia was for asking for $500 a month when they were about to be swimming in cash. They did not question why a luxury brand wanted a controversial influencer who had just gone viral for animal cruelty. They did not question the timing. They were so blinded by their own reflection in the mirror that they did not see the trap closing around their necks. Keisha looked at Brad, her eyes shining with tears of joy, and said, "This proves it. We are untouchable." The summons came less than an hour after the email was delivered. My mother did not call to share the good news. She called to tell me that the family was having a celebratory dinner, and since I could not contribute financially to the household, the least I could do was contribute my labor. I arrived to find the house transformed into a shrine to Keisha. My sister was lounging on the silk chaise like Cleopatra, while my mother massaged her shoulders. The air smelled of expensive steak and even more expensive arrogance. "Nia, get in the kitchen," Beatrice commanded without looking up. "We are having filet mignon and lobster tails. Try not to overcook them like you did last Christmas. Tonight is about perfection. Tonight we celebrate real success." I walked into the kitchen and tied an apron over my designer streetwear. I became the help. For the next 2 hours, I sweated over the hot stove, grilling steaks to medium rare perfection and clarifying butter for the lobster. I arranged the truffle mashed potatoes on their best china. I carried the heavy serving platter out to the dining room, where Brad was already popping a bottle of vintage champagne. He did not say thank you. He just pointed to his empty glass. "Pour it, Nia," Brad said, snapping his fingers. "And try not to spill it. This bottle costs more than your weekly paycheck." I poured the golden liquid, my hands steady. I watched as they raised their glasses in a toast that made my stomach turn. To Keisha, my father boomed, his face flushed with pride. The breadwinner, the star, the daughter who finally put the Worthington name on the map. To me, Keisha squealed, clinking her glass against Brad's. I am going to be famous, real famous, not just internet famous. Beauty X is huge. I retreated to the kitchen sink, plunging my hands into the hot, soapy water to scrub their dirty pots and pans. Through the open doorway, I watched them feast. They were eating food. I cooked, drinking wine. I poured, celebrating a contract I wrote. My mother looked over at me, her eyes narrowing with disdain. It is a shame you did not inherit your sister's drive, Nia, Beatrice called out between bites of lobster. Maybe if you worked harder, you could be the one sitting here. But I suppose someone has to wash the dishes. Every family needs a worker bee to support the queen. I scrubbed a cast iron skillet harder, imagining it was Brad's face. Let them enjoy the meal. Let them get fat and happy and drunk on their own hubris. The higher they climbed, the harder they would fall. And I would be right there at the bottom waiting to catch the pieces, not to put them back together, but to sweep them into the trash. Brad wiped the grease from his chin with a linen napkin and reached for the tablet lying on the mahogany dining table. He put on his reading glasses not because he needed them, but because he wanted to look like the high-powered agent he pretended to be. The room went silent. My mother stopped chewing her steak. Keisha leaned forward, holding her breath. They were all waiting for Brad's verdict as if he were a Supreme Court judge. I stood by the kitchen door, leaning against the frame with a dish towel in my hand. I watched Brad unlock the screen. I knew exactly what he was looking at. I had drafted the document myself with my top legal team, ensuring every loophole was closed tight. But I also knew Brad. I knew his arrogance made him lazy. Standard boilerplate, Brad muttered, scrolling through the first 10 pages in less than 5 seconds. He was not reading a single word. He was skimming for the only thing that mattered to him: the numbers. He paused when he reached page 3. The compensation schedule. His eyes widened behind his lenses and a slow, greedy smile spread across his face. Babe, this is legit, he said, looking up at Keisha. $50,000 wiring instruction upon signature. The rest paid out in monthly installments. They are even covering travel expenses for the launch party. Keisha squealed, clapping her hands together. So can I sign it? I want to post the announcement tonight. Hold on, Brad said, holding up a hand. Let me just check the liability section. I have to protect my client. I held my breath. This was the moment. The morality clause was buried in the addendum on page 42, right after the section on force majeure. It was standard for high-end contracts, but the specific language I had inserted was lethal. It defined bullying, harassment, and public controversy as grounds for immediate termination and full repayment of all monies. If Brad actually read the contract, he would see it. He would see that the video Keisha posted yesterday was already a breach of contract. But Brad did not scroll to page 42. He glanced at the liability waiver, saw the words "hold harmless," and decided he had seen enough. He swiped past the addendum entirely. He swiped past the trap I had laid for him. It looks clean, Brad announced, tossing the tablet across the table to Keisha. It is a standard influencer agreement. Nothing to worry about. Sign it, baby. Let us get paid. Keisha grabbed the digital pen. She did not even look at the screen. She just scribbled her signature with a flourish, pressing down hard enough to almost crack the glass. Then she handed the pen to Brad. Witnessed and approved by Bradley Worthington, the third manager, he said, signing his name with a pompous loop. They hit submit. A green checkmark appeared on the screen, confirming the document had been sent to the legal department at Onyx Shield. My phone buzzed silently in my pocket. It was a notification from my own server. Contract executed. I looked at them. They were hugging each other, cheering, popping another bottle of champagne. They thought they had just won the lottery. They had no idea they had just signed a confession. They had just legally agreed to hand me everything they owned the moment I decided to pull the trigger. I turned back to the sink and turned on the water to hide the sound of my laughter. Enjoy the champagne, I thought. It is the last expensive thing you will ever taste. I stood with my back to them, scrubbing a pot that was already clean. The sound of the digital confirmation ping was music to my ears. It was a sweeter sound than any symphony I had ever heard. Brad tossed the tablet onto the table with a careless thud. He poured another round of Dom Perignon, the foam spilling over the rim of the flute onto the expensive tablecloth. They were clinking glasses to a future that had just been erased. They were celebrating their own funeral, and they were too drunk on greed to see the grave they had just dug for themselves. I dried my hands on the rough kitchen towel, feeling the texture of the fabric against my skin. It was a grounding sensation that kept me from laughing out loud. My mother Beatrice was beaming at Keisha with a look of adoration she had never once directed at me. She was praising God for this blessing, unaware that the blessing was actually a curse written by her rejected daughter. They thought the $50,000 was a lifeline. In reality, it was the last meal given to a condemned prisoner. I looked at the three of them through the reflection in the dark kitchen window. They looked distorted and ghostly. I thought about the morality clause sitting on page 42 like a dormant virus. I knew exactly when I would activate it. I would not do it today. I would not do it tomorrow. I would wait until they had spent the money. I would wait until they had booked the venues and bought the clothes and told the world they were winners. I would let them climb as high as possible because the fall from the top is the only one that guarantees fatal results. Brad raised his glass high. To the Worthingtons he bellowed, his face flushed. To money and power. I untied the apron slowly, letting it fall to the floor. It was a symbolic shedding of the role they had forced me to play. I was no longer the maid. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the architect of their destruction. I walked out of the kitchen past the dining room where the laughter was loud and raucous. I did not say goodbye. I did not look back. As I stepped out onto the front porch, the cool night air hit my face. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to my legal team. The Eagle has landed. Proceed with Phase 2. I got into my rusted Honda Civic and started the engine. As I drove away, leaving the mansion in my rearview mirror, I felt a profound sense of peace. The trap was not just set, it was welded shut, and now the real show was about to begin. The wire transfer hit their account at exactly 9 in the morning. $50,000 of fresh capital. A smart couple would have used that money to pay off the maxed-out Amex card or secure their faltering rental lease. But Keisha and Brad were not smart. They were intoxicated by the illusion of wealth. By noon, they had burned through half the signing bonus. By dinner time, they had spent money they had not even earned yet. Their first stop was the Jaguar dealership on Peachtree Street. Brad walked in wearing his best suit, demanding to speak to the senior sales manager. He did not want a practical vehicle. He wanted a symbol. He traded in the lease on his already expensive SUV and put down a massive down payment on a custom F-type convertible in British racing green. He signed the financing papers for the remaining balance without reading a single digit of the interest rate. He told the salesman that money was no object now that his wife was the face of a global brand. Keisha, meanwhile, was busy spending her future paychecks. She dragged a high-end real estate agent to a sprawling mansion in Buckhead listed for $2.5 million. It was a palace of white marble and glass, completely out of their actual price range. But Keisha walked through the halls like she already owned the deed. She touched the quartz countertops and imagined her launch party in the foyer. She told the agent they would take it. She wrote a check for the earnest money deposit using the remainder of the signing bonus. She was gambling that the monthly installments from Beauty X would cover the mortgage. They spent the rest of the week living in a fever dream of consumerism. They ate at the most expensive steakhouses, ordering bottles of wine they could not pronounce. They went to Phipps Plaza and bought designer handbags and watches, flashing their platinum cards that were now slightly less over the limit. Keisha documented every single purchase on Instagram. She posted photos of the new car keys. She posted video tours of the mansion they had not closed on yet. She captioned every post with hashtags like blessed and level up. They were building a castle on a foundation of sand. They were so busy projecting the image of success that they forgot the reality of their contract. Every receipt they printed was another nail in their coffin. They were digging a hole so deep that when the ladder was pulled away, they would never be able to climb out. I watched it all from a distance, monitoring their credit inquiries and their social media feed. It was fascinating and horrifying to watch two people sprint toward a cliff edge, convinced they could fly. They were living like kings and queens for a week, unaware that the guillotine was already sharpened and waiting for them. 3 days after Keisha and Brad signed their death warrant disguised as a contract, I returned to my modest rental apartment to find a neon orange eviction notice taped to the front door. It was a violent splash of color against the peeling beige paint. Mr. Henderson, my landlord, was waiting for me on the porch, wringing his hands nervously. He was a decent elderly man who had always appreciated that I paid my rent early, but today he refused to meet my eyes. He looked at his shoes as he delivered the news. "I am sorry, Ms. Johnson," he mumbled, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. I received a call this morning from a very prominent woman in the community. She informed me that you are running an illegal business out of this unit, and that the police are investigating you for fraud. I cannot have that kind of trouble at my property." I did not argue. I did not ask for proof. I knew exactly who the prominent woman was. My mother did not just want to humiliate me, she wanted to erase my stability. As soon as Mr. Henderson's truck pulled away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with the eviction notice in my hand, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Mother. The timing was surgical. She had waited exactly long enough for the shock to set in before swooping in like a savior with a poisoned apple. "Hello, Nia," Beatrice said, her voice light and airy as if we were discussing the weather. "I heard through the grapevine that you are having some trouble with your housing situation. Such a shame. It is so hard to find a decent place when you have a turbulent reputation." I gripped the phone tight enough to turn my knuckles white. "You called him, didn't you? You told him lies to get me thrown out. You are trying to make Zola homeless." "I simply expressed concern as a mother," Beatrice replied, her tone dripping with fake innocence. "I told him that I was worried about my granddaughter's safety, given your erratic behavior lately. Whatever he decided to do with that information is his business. But listen, Nia, I am not a monster. I cannot have my granddaughter sleeping on the street even if her mother is a disaster." She paused, letting the silence stretch to ensure I felt the full weight of my supposed desperation. "We have the pool house," she continued. "It is small and needs some cleaning, but it has a roof. You and Zola can stay there until you get back on your feet. But there is a condition. You need to come to the Beauty X launch party next week. You need to stand on that stage, hold your sister's hand, and tell everyone that you lied. You need to admit that you were jealous and that Keisha is a saint. You will apologize on your knees, Nia. And then maybe if you are convincing enough, I will let you live in our backyard." The cruelty was breathtaking. She did not just want to defeat me. She wanted to domesticate me. She wanted to break my spirit so completely that I would be grateful for the scraps from their table. She wanted me to live in the servants' quarters, while my sister lived in a mansion bought with my money. I forced a wobble into my voice, playing the part of the broken daughter one last time. "I have nowhere else to go, Mom," I whispered. "I know," dear Beatrice said, satisfied. "We will see you at the party. Do not be late, and wear something appropriate. You represent the help after all." She hung up. I stared at the black screen of my phone. She thought she had forced me into the pool house. She had no idea she had just forced me to move Zola into the presidential suite at the Four Seasons. I tore the eviction notice off the door and crumpled it into a ball. They wanted me on my knees. I would be on my feet standing over the wreckage of their lives. The presidential suite at the Four Seasons was a silent fortress of velvet and marble. It was the only place in Atlanta where I felt my heart rate finally slow down. While my mother and sister were likely laughing over their wine, imagining me weeping in a motel room, I was actually watching my daughter eat chocolate-covered strawberries on a duvet made of Egyptian cotton. The contrast between their fantasy of my misery and the reality of my power was the only thing keeping me sane. Zola looked so small in the king-sized bed. The trauma of the last few days had left dark circles under her innocent eyes. She pushed a half-eaten strawberry around her porcelain plate, not looking at me. The silence in the room was heavy, not with tension, but with the weight of unspoken questions. I sat on the edge of the mattress, brushing a braid away from her forehead. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the city below. "Why does Grandma hate me?" The question hit me harder than any physical blow. It was the question I had spent my entire adult life trying to prevent her from asking. I had swallowed their insults, I had played the role of the black sheep, and I had dimmed my own light, all to shield Zola from their darkness. But I had failed. The toxicity I had tried to filter out had finally seeped through and poisoned my child's self-worth. I pulled her into my lap, wrapping the plush hotel robe tighter around her small, shivering frame. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive back to that mansion and burn it to the ground. But I forced my voice to remain steady and calm. "Grandma does not hate you, Zola," I said, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon. "Grandma and Auntie Keisha are like broken mirrors. When they look at people, they do not see them clearly. They only see cracks and distortions. It has nothing to do with you. You are perfect. You are smart and kind and beautiful. The problem is, then they are incapable of seeing beauty because they are so ugly on the inside." Zola looked up at me, her brown eyes searching for the truth. "Is that why they poured paint on me? To make me ugly like them?" I felt a tear slide down my cheek. "Yes, baby," I whispered. "That is exactly why. They wanted to dim your light because it shines too bright for their tired eyes. But we are not going to let them. We are going to shine so bright that they will have to wear sunglasses just to look at us." I rocked her until her breathing deepened into sleep. I laid her back against the pillows and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Atlanta sprawled out beneath me, a grid of golden lights. My mother thought she had broken me. She thought she had sent me to the pool house to learn my place. She did not know that she had just given me the final motivation I needed. I looked at my sleeping daughter and made a silent promise to the universe. By this time next week, the only person wondering why they are hated will be Beatrice Worthington. I turned away from the window and picked up my phone. It was time to accept the invitation to the party. It was time to walk into the lion's den, not as the prey, but as the hunter. The digital invitation arrived with a chime that sounded innocent, but carried the weight of a declaration of war. I tapped the screen and Keisha's face filled the display, heavily airbrushed and glowing with artificial perfection. The headline screamed, "The Face of Beauty-X, a Night of Excellence honoring Keisha Worthington." It was gaudy. It was loud. It was exactly the kind of vanity project I expected from someone who had never earned a single dollar of their own success. Below the flashy graphic was a personal note written in the passive-aggressive dialect my sister was fluent in. "Hey Nia, I know things are super tough for you right now with the eviction and everything. Mom told me she is letting you crash in the pool house. That is so generous of her. I wanted to extend an olive branch and invite you to my big launch. I know you cannot afford the $500 ticket price, so I added you to the guest list. I put you under support staff, so you do not have to pay." I stared at the words, feeling a cold smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Support staff. She did not invite me to celebrate. She invited me to serve. She wanted me there to witness her ascension, but she wanted to make sure I did it from the shadows. The message continued with specific instructions that made her intentions crystal clear. Since you are technically on the staff list, please arrive 2 hours early to help stuff the gift bags. Also, please wear something neutral like black or gray. We want all eyes on the talent tonight. And maybe leave Zola with a sitter. This is an exclusive event, and we cannot have any drama or accidents. She was inviting me to her coronation to work as a glorified usher. She wanted me to stand in the back wearing drab colors while she sparkled in the spotlight that my money had paid for. She needed me there to complete the picture of her victory. For Keisha, winning was not enough. She needed to see me losing. She needed to look down from her stage and see her big sister bowing her head in defeat. I walked over to the desk where my laptop sat open. On the screen was a folder labeled Project Karma. It contained the unedited security footage, the forensic financial report showing their bankruptcy, and the signed contract with the morality clause glowing in high definition. Keisha thought she was sending an invitation to her poor, desperate sister. She had no idea she had just sent a VIP pass to her own executioner. I typed a reply, keeping it short and sweet. Thank you, Keisha. I would not miss it for the world. I will be there early. And do not worry about Zola, she will be safe. I hit send. I did not tell her that I would not be wearing black. I did not tell her that I would be arriving in a motorcade. And I certainly did not tell her that the only thing I would be stuffing into gift bags was a lawsuit that would ruin her life. I set the phone down. She wanted me to witness her glory. I would do exactly that. I would watch it rise up for one beautiful moment, just so I could be the one to smash it back down into the dirt. The morning of the party, I was not at a salon getting my hair done. I was deep inside the server room of Onyx Shield, standing behind Jamal, my head of cyber forensics. The room was kept at a freezing temperature to protect the towers of processors that lined the walls like black monoliths. The only light came from the blue glow of the monitors, reflecting off Jamal's glasses. He was the best in the business, a man who could find a deleted email from 10 years ago in under 10 minutes. Today his target was much easier. He was hunting for the digital footprints of a narcissist. You were right, boss, Jamal said, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. Your sister understands filters, but she does not understand cloud architecture. She deleted the original video from her camera roll, and she even emptied her trash folder on the device. But she forgot about the automatic backup that syncs to her cloud account every time she connects to Wi-Fi. He hit a final key with a flourish. The large center screen flickered, and a video file appeared. It was time-stamped exactly 2 minutes before the incident at the garden party. I leaned in closer, my arms crossed over my chest. Play it, I commanded. The video started. It was high-definition footage shot from a tripod setup. But this was not the edited version the world had seen. This was the raw file. It showed Keisha standing on the stage alone before Zola was even called up. She was adjusting the bucket of paint rigged above the flowers. She looked directly into the camera lens and winked. Watch this, guys, she whispered to her invisible audience. I am about to pull the ultimate prank on my stiff sister and her weird kid. This is going to get so many views. My blood ran cold. It was premeditated. It was not a prank gone wrong or a spontaneous joke. She had planned it. She had set the trap specifically to humiliate my daughter for content. Jamal let the video play. I watched Zola walk onto the stage. I watched Keisha pull the ribbon. I watched the paint fall. But the raw audio captured something the edited version had scrubbed. When Zola started screaming, Keisha did not look shocked. She laughed. It was a clear, distinct laugh followed by her shouting, "Look at her face!" Jamal paused the video. The frame froze on Keisha's triumphant smirk, juxtaposed with my daughter's agony. The silence in the server room was heavy. This is the smoking gun, Jamal said quietly. This proves malice. It proves intent to cause distress. And since she monetized the video, it proves she profited from child abuse. I stared at the screen. This file was more than just a defense. It was a nuclear warhead. With this, I could not only sue her for defamation, I could have her charged with child endangerment. I could destroy her reputation so thoroughly that she would not be able to get a job at a fast food drive-through, let alone represent a luxury beauty brand. Loaded onto a secure drive, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. And make a copy for the legal team. We are not just going to show this to a judge, we are going to show it to everyone. Jamal nodded and initiated the transfer. I watched the progress bar fill up green. Keisha thought she had deleted the truth. She forgot the first rule of the digital age. The internet never forgets, and neither do I. I walked out of the server room, leaving the cold blue light behind. I had the weapon. Now all I needed was the stage. The walk-in closet of the presidential suite was larger than the entire apartment my mother had evicted me from. It was a cathedral of consumerism, filled with rows of designer garments I had kept hidden in storage units for years. Tonight was not about fashion. Tonight was about psychological warfare. Keisha had sent me a text message ordering me to wear gray. She wanted me to blend into the woodwork. She wanted me to be invisible. I reached into the back of the rack and pulled out a garment bag that was heavy with intention. I unzipped the bag and the fabric whispered. I did not choose a dress. A dress implied softness. A dress implied that I was there to be looked at. Instead, I chose a custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo in a blinding stark white. It was aggressive. It was sharp. It was the color of a funeral shroud for my enemies. I slipped into the trousers, which were cut to elongate my legs, making me look 7 feet tall. I buttoned the jacket. It nipped in at the waist and flared slightly at the hips, creating a silhouette that was both feminine and terrifying. I sat at the vanity mirror. I did not apply the soft, natural makeup of the poor, struggling sister. I applied the war paint of the CEO. I used liquid liner to draw wings sharp enough to cut glass. I painted my lips a deep oxblood red, a color that signaled danger. I pulled my hair back into a severe, sleek bun at the base of my neck. No flyaways, no curls, just geometry and discipline. I looked at my reflection. The woman staring back at me was a stranger to my family. They had never met this Nia. They only knew the version of me that shrank in their presence. They only knew the version that apologized for existing. This woman in the mirror did not apologize. This woman owned the building they were partying in. I reached for the small silver USB drive sitting on the marble counter. It contained the raw footage of Keisha abusing my daughter. It contained the financial records of Brad's bankruptcy. It was the bullet for the gun I was about to fire. I slipped the drive into the inner breast pocket of my white jacket right next to my heart. I patted the pocket once to ensure it was secure. Keisha wanted me to be support staff. She wanted me to hand out gift bags and fetch drinks. I adjusted my lapels and gave my reflection a cold, hard smile. I would support her, all right. I would support her right off the ledge she had climbed onto. I turned off the lights, plunging the room into darkness. The transformation was complete. The victim was dead. The executioner was leaving the building. The venue was dripping with crystals and desperate ambition. A long crimson carpet stretched up the stairs of the grand ballroom, lined with velvet ropes and photographers flashing their bulbs at anyone who looked expensive. I walked toward the entrance, my white tuxedo glowing under the marquee lights. The air smelled of imported orchids and anxiety. At the top of the stairs stood Brad. He was acting as the gatekeeper, checking names on a tablet, with an air of self-importance that was almost comical. He wore a velvet dinner jacket that was slightly too tight across the shoulders, a physical manifestation of his inflated ego. When he saw me ascending the stairs, his face twisted into a sneer. He did not notice the impeccable tailoring of my suit. He did not notice the diamond studs in my ears. He only saw the sister-in-law he despised coming to crash his party. He stepped away from the podium and blocked my path physically, barring me from the glass doors. "Whoa, hold your horses, Nia," he said, holding up a hand like a traffic cop. "Where do you think you are going?" I stopped on the step below him, looking up into his watery blue eyes. "I am here for the launch, Brad." I was invited, remember? Brad laughed. It was a loud barking sound that drew the attention of the guests standing nearby. You were invited to work, Nia. You were invited to help. Read the room. Look at these people. This is the VIP entrance. This is for investors and influencers. This is for people who matter. He looked me up and down, his lip curling in disgust. And what is this outfit? We told you to wear gray. You look like a waiter at a theme restaurant. You are trying to steal attention, and it is pathetic. He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of scotch and mints. He lowered his voice to a hiss meant only for me. Listen to me carefully. We do not want you ruining the aesthetic. You are not walking through these doors. He pointed a manicured finger toward a dark, narrow alleyway running along the side of the building. Steam was rising from a vent, and a large metal dumpster was visible in the shadows. The service entrance is around the corner. That is where the janitors and the catering staff enter. That is where the trash goes out, and that is where the help goes in. That is your lane, Nia. Go around the back before I have security throw you off the curb. I looked at the dark alley. Then I looked at Brad. He stood there, puffing out his chest, believing he was the king of the castle. He thought he was banishing me to the squalor I deserved. He had no idea that I had bought this building 2 years ago. He had no idea that the security guards standing behind him were wearing earpieces connected to my personal channel. I did not get angry. I did not argue. I simply smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey stumble into a pit. You are right, Brad, I said, my voice smooth and calm. I should go where I belong. I turned on my heel and walked away. But I did not head toward the alley. I walked past him straight toward the main glass doors. Brad reached out to grab my arm. Hey! I said, the back entrance, he shouted. Before his hand could touch my white jacket, the 2 massive security guards flanking the door stepped forward. They moved with synchronized precision. One of them intercepted Brad's hand, gripping his wrist with iron fingers. The other pulled the heavy glass door open for me and bowed his head deep in respect. Good evening, Ms. Johnson, the guard said, his voice booming. The board is waiting for you inside. I stepped into the air-conditioned lobby, leaving Brad standing on the sidewalk with his mouth open. He looked confused. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. But he had not seen a ghost. He had just seen the owner. I walked into the grand ballroom and the atmosphere changed instantly. The hum of conversation faltered as guests turned to look at the woman in the white tuxedo who walked with the stride of a panther. I did not look at the floor. I did not shrink. I walked straight down the center aisle toward the VIP section where my parents were holding court. Brad came scrambling in behind me, his face flushed with exertion and embarrassment. He grabbed my elbow, his fingers digging into the fabric of my suit. You have 5 seconds to get out of here, Naya, he hissed. You are embarrassing the family. You are embarrassing Keisha. Security made a mistake letting you in, but I am going to fix it personally. My mother. Beatrice rushed forward, her sequins rattling with indignation. Nia, what are you doing? She whispered, her eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. We told you to use the service entrance. And look at you. You look ridiculous. Go to the back room immediately and start filling the gift bags. Before I could shake Brad's hand off my arm, a figure emerged from the crowd. It was Mr. Sterling, the general manager of the hotel. He was a man who terrified his staff and intimidated billionaires, but right now, he was moving toward us with an expression of pure deference. He signaled for 2 waiters to step aside as he made a beeline for our group. Brad puffed out his chest, assuming the manager was coming to throw me out. Thank God you are here, mister. Sterling, Brad said, pointing a finger at my face. This woman is crashing the event. She is a disgruntled relative. Please have her removed before she causes a scene. Mr. Sterling stopped 3 feet away. He looked at Brad with the same mild annoyance one gives to a buzzing fly. Then he turned his full attention to me. He straightened his tie and bowed at the waist, a deep, formal gesture of respect that silenced the immediate area. Good evening, Madam President, Sterling said, his voice clear and projecting. Welcome back to the properties. We are honored to host the launch of your subsidiary tonight. The silence that followed was absolute. Brad froze, his finger still pointing at me. My mother's mouth fell open slightly, her eyes glazing over with confusion. My father. Desmond blinked rapidly, as if his brain was trying to reboot. Madam President. Brad repeated the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. He let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. You have the wrong person, Sterling. This is Naya. She is nobody. She is here to wash dishes. Mr. Sterling did not even look at him. He kept his eyes locked on mine. Shall I have security escort these guests to their seats, Madam President, or would you prefer to deal with them personally? I looked at my family. They were staring at me like I had suddenly sprouted wings and breathed fire. The cognitive dissonance was almost painful to watch. They could not reconcile the daughter they evicted with the woman being bowed to by the most powerful hotelier in the city. It is fine, Henri. I said, my voice cool and dismissive. They are confused. Let them stay. I want them to see the show. Very good, ma'am, Sterling said, stepping aside to clear my path. I walked past my parents, leaving them frozen in a tableau of shock. I heard my mother whisper to my father, asking if she had heard correctly. They were trying to rationalize it. They were telling themselves it was a joke or a mistake. They were clinging to their delusion because the truth was too terrifying to accept. But as I walked toward the stage, I knew that the time for delusions was over. Reality was about to hit them like a freight train. The grand ballroom went pitch black. The murmur of the crowd died down instantly, replaced by the expectant hush of 1,000 people holding their breath. A single beam of stark white light cut through the darkness, hitting center stage with the force of a lightning bolt. Music swelled from the speakers. It was a slow, emotional, instrumental piece designed to tug at heartstrings. Then Keisha emerged from behind the heavy velvet curtains. She looked like a porcelain doll dipped in diamonds. Her gown was a cascade of blush pink tulle that rustled with every step. Her hair was styled in soft, romantic waves that framed a face perfectly painted to feign innocence. She walked to the microphone stand, not with the strut of a businesswoman, but with the hesitant steps of a humble survivor. It was a performance worthy of Broadway. She gripped the microphone with both hands and looked out into the blinding light, blinking rapidly as if overwhelmed by the love in the room. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was breathy and thick with manufactured emotion. She paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Thank you all for being here on the most important night of my life." She took a deep, shaky breath and reached for a tissue that had been strategically placed on the podium. She dabbed at her dry eyes, ensuring she did not smudge her mascara. "People see the photos," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "They see the followers and the likes. But they do not see the struggle. They do not see the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I was good enough. They do not see the sacrifices my family made to get me here." The camera flashed blindingly, capturing her moment of vulnerability. In the front row, my mother Beatrice was already sobbing. She was clutching a napkin to her chest, rocking back and forth as if she were at a revival. Desmond had his arm around her, nodding solemnly, playing the part of the stoic patriarch. Brad sat next to them, looking smug and self-satisfied, convinced that his wife was owning the room. Keisha looked down at them, smiling through her fake tears. I could not have done this without my rock, my husband Brad, and my parents who taught me the value of integrity and kindness. Then her expression shifted. She adopted a look of tragic benevolence, the kind a saint gives to a sinner. "And I also want to dedicate this night to my sister Nia." A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. Keisha looked out into the darkness, searching the back of the room where she assumed I was standing in a gray uniform holding a tray of drinks. "Nia has had a hard life," Keisha said, her voice dropping to a sympathetic register. "She has struggled with anger and jealousy for a long time. It has not been easy for us. But tonight, I want to say publicly that I forgive her. I love her despite her flaws. I want her to know that even though she is broken, she is still my sister." And I hope that seeing me up here inspires her to finally make something of herself. The audience applauded. They clapped for her grace. They clapped for her charity. They saw a successful, beautiful woman extending an olive branch to a bitter failure. It was the perfect narrative. It was the perfect lie. I stood in the shadows just off stage listening to her assassinate my character with a smile. She was painting herself as the hero of a story she did not even know the ending to. She thought she was giving a victory speech. She did not realize she was reading her own eulogy. Keisha stood center stage basking in the applause with her arms wide open. She looked like a goddess accepting an offering. The giant LED screen behind her displayed her name in gold cursive letters towering over the audience. She closed her eyes, soaking in the moment of her absolute victory. Then the music cut out. It did not fade out gracefully. It stopped with a violent, jarring screech of feedback that made everyone in the front row cover their ears. The golden letters on the screen flickered and died. The massive wall of light went pitch black. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Keisha opened her eyes, looking toward the tech booth with a flash of irritation breaking her saintly mask. Technical difficulties. She laughed nervously into the microphone. It seems our energy is just too high for the system. Suddenly the screen roared back to life, but the gold graphics were gone. In their place was grainy, high-definition footage. The audio boomed through the concert-grade speakers so loud it shook the floor. "Watch this, guys." Keisha's voice echoed through the ballroom. It was not the soft, tearful voice she had just used. It was sharp and cruel. On the screen, the Keisha from 2 days ago looked into the camera and winked. "I am about to pull the ultimate prank on my stiff sister and her weird kid. This is going to get so many views." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It sounded like 1,000 people holding their breath at once. Keisha spun around and saw her own face projected 40 feet high. She froze. The video played on. The audience watched the bucket tip. They watched the heavy red sludge crash down on a 6-year-old child. But the video did not cut away like the Instagram version. It stayed focused on Keisha's face. The ballroom watched in horror as the on-screen Keisha threw her head back and laughed. It was a manic, ugly sound. "Look at her face!" she screamed on the video, pointing a finger at the sobbing child. "She looks like a melted crayon. Oh my God, this is gold. Keep filming. Keep." In the VIP section, my mother Beatrice stood up, her hands covering her mouth. The guests around her began to pull away, creating a physical distance from the family. But the show was not over. The screen cut to black again, and a waveform appeared. It was audio now. Brad's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "She is trash, Nia. You are nothing. Sign the paper, or I call the sheriff. You know you cannot afford a lawyer. You are just a poor little girl who needs to learn her place." Brad jumped up from his seat, knocking his chair over. "Turn it off!" he screamed, waving his arms at the control booth. "Cut the feed. It is a lie. It is AI. Turn it off." But the technicians did not move. They had their orders. The crowd began to turn. The applause had turned into a low, angry rumble. People were taking out their phones, recording the meltdown. Keisha stood on stage, trembling. The illusion of the victim was shattered into a million pieces. She looked small and vicious, exposed by her own vanity. She looked out at the sea of faces and saw only disgust. She grabbed the microphone, screaming over the sound of her own recorded laughter. "This is not real. Someone is hacking us. Stop it. Stop it right now." But the video looped. Keisha's laughter. Brad's threats. Keisha's laughter. Brad's threats. It was a symphony of their corruption playing on repeat for the entire city to hear. And in the darkness at the edge of the stage, I adjusted my white cuffs and prepared to step into the light. The loop of Keisha laughing at my daughter played one last time before I signaled the booth to cut the feed. The sudden silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The grand ballroom was frozen in a state of collective shock. 1,000 eyes shifted from the dark screen to the stage where Keisha stood trembling. She looked like a statue of fear, her pink dress suddenly looking like a costume she was too small to fill. She saw me approaching from the wings in my blinding white tuxedo, and she took a stumbling step back. I walked to the center of the stage. The click of my heels on the hardwood floor echoed through the microphone. I did not look at the audience yet. I looked only at my sister. I reached out and took the microphone from her hand. She surrendered it without a fight, her fingers limp and cold. She was paralyzed by the realization that her narrative was not just broken, it was incinerated. I turned to face the crowd. The spotlight hit me and I absorbed it. I did not blink. "Please forgive the interruption," I said, my voice steady and clear, ringing out through the concert-grade speakers. My sister seems to have left out a few crucial details in her touching speech. She told you I was a failure. She told you I was a charity case. She told you that she was the breadwinner of this family. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I looked down at the VIP section. Brad was clutching the back of a chair, his face the color of old ash. My parents were huddled together, looking up at me with the terrified expression of people watching a tsunami make landfall. The truth is often quieter than a lie. I continued walking to the edge of the stage. My family believes that power comes from loud noises and shiny objects. They believe that because I chose a life of privacy, I was weak. They mistook my silence for submission. They mistook my patience for poverty. I gestured to the massive banners hanging from the ceiling bearing the BeautyX logo. You all came here tonight to meet the visionary behind this brand. You came to see who holds the keys to the kingdom. Well, you are looking at her. A gasp rippled through the room. It started in the front row and rolled back like a wave. My name is Nia Johnson. I am the founder and CEO of Onyx Shield Global. I own the security firm that guards these doors. I own the holding company that purchased this hotel last year. And I am the sole owner of BeautyX. Keisha let out a small, strangled sob behind me. She collapsed to her knees, the pink tulle billowing around her like a wilting flower. That is right, Keisha, I said, turning slightly so she could see my face. You did not sign a contract with a stranger. You signed a contract with me. You work for me. And you just violated the morality clause of that contract in spectacular high-definition fashion. I looked back at Brad. He was shaking his head, mouthing the word no over and over again. I am not the poor relation you thought you could bully, I announced to the room. I am the landlord. I am the bank. And as of this moment, I am the plaintiff. You wanted to be famous, Keisha. Congratulations. You are about to become the most famous defendant in the state of Georgia. The massive LED screen behind me shifted again. The looping video of Keisha's cruelty vanished. In its place, a legal document appeared, magnified 50 times its original size. The words were crisp and black against the white background. It was the contract Keisha and Brad had signed so eagerly just 48 hours ago. A red laser pointer dot appeared on the screen, controlled by the clicker in my hand. I circled the paragraph labeled Morality and Conduct. I turned to Brad, who was still standing in the front row, looking like a man trying to wake up from a nightmare. You should have read the fine print, Brad. I told you I valued education. If you had actually read what you were signing, you would have seen this clause. I read the words aloud, my voice booming through the silent hall. The ambassador agrees that any behavior resulting in public scandal, ridicule, or disrepute constitutes a material breach of this agreement. In the event of such a breach, the ambassador is liable for the immediate repayment of all advances, plus liquidated damages equal to 3 times the projected campaign value. I looked down at Keisha. She was still on her knees, staring up at the screen with empty eyes. You destroyed the reputation of BeautyX before we even launched, I said coldly. You associated my brand with child abuse and bullying. That video has now been seen by millions. The damage is done, and per the document you signed, you are now financially responsible for that damage. I clicked the remote again. A spreadsheet appeared. Repayment of signing bonus $50,000. Production costs for tonight's wasted event $500,000. Brand reputation damages $1.5 million. The crowd gasped. I let the number hang in the air. You owe me $2 million, I announced. And since I know for a fact that you have less than $200 in your checking account, I will be seizing your assets. The car you bought yesterday, the down payment on that house, it is all mine now. You are not just broke, you are destitute. Brad lunged forward, his face purple with rage. You cannot do this, he screamed. We will sue you. This is entrapment. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You can try, Brad. But I have more lawyers on retainer than you have friends. And honestly, the money is the least of your problems. I signaled to the back of the room. The heavy double doors swung open. 4 uniformed police officers marched in. They were not hotel security. They were Atlanta PD. Money is a civil matter, I said, stepping back from Keisha. But pouring toxic chemicals on a child, that is criminal. I have submitted the unedited footage to the district attorney. They agree that it constitutes clear evidence of child endangerment and assault with malice. Keisha let out a high-pitched shriek as the officers climbed the stage stairs. They pulled her up from the floor. She kicked and screamed, her pink tulle dress tearing under their grip. Mom, do something, she wailed, looking at Beatrice. Daddy, help me. But my parents did not move. They sat frozen in their chairs, watching their golden child get handcuffed. The flashbulbs popped frantically, capturing the image of the face of Beauty X being read her Miranda rights. I looked at my parents. You wanted a spectacle, I said into the microphone. You wanted the world to look at your daughter. Well, look at her. Look at exactly what you created. I dropped the microphone. It hit the stage floor with a heavy thud. The sound signaled the end of their era and the beginning of mine. I turned my back on the chaos and walked off the stage, leaving them to the judgment of the world. The chaos in the ballroom was absolute. The air was thick with the frenzied energy of a scandal unfolding in real time. I watched from the wings as the police officers maneuvered Keisha through the parting crowd. Her pink dress was torn at the hem, and her mascara was running down her cheeks in black rivulets. She was screaming for her husband, but Brad did not move to help her. He was paralyzed, standing in the debris of his shattered ego, watching the only asset he cared about being hauled away. Brad looked around the room, his eyes wide with panic. He was searching for an exit strategy. He looked at the investors who were furiously typing on their phones, likely distancing themselves from him on LinkedIn. He looked at the influencers who were live streaming his humiliation. Then he felt the vibration in his breast pocket. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen. The caller ID read, Father. For a split second, a look of relief washed over his face. He actually believed he was safe. He believed that the Worthington name was a magic shield that could deflect any arrow, even one fired by the truth. He answered the phone, pressing it to his ear with a trembling hand. Dad, he shouted over the noise. You have to help me. Nia went crazy. She staged this whole thing. You need to call the firm. You need to call the mayor. Get these cops out of here. I could not hear the voice on the other end, but I could see the blood drain from Brad's face. It happened instantly. One moment he was flushed with indignation, the next he was pale as a ghost. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. But Dad, he stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. It is not my fault. She tricked us. I did not know about the contract clauses. Please listen to me. He stopped talking. He just listened. His mouth opened and closed fish like gasping for air that wasn't there. The conversation on the other end was clearly short, brutal, and final. Brad slowly lowered the phone from his ear. The call had ended. He stared at the device as if it had bitten him. My parents! Beatrice and Desmond rushed over to him, grabbing his arms. What did he say? Beatrice asked frantically. Is he sending the lawyers? Is he posting bail? Tell us, Brad. Fix this. Brad looked at them. The arrogance was gone, the sneer was gone. All that was left was a terrified little boy playing dress-up in a man's suit. "He said, 'I am done,'" Brad whispered, his voice hollow. He saw the video. He saw the contract. He said, "I have disgraced the family name." Desmond shook him. "So what does that mean? What about the money? We need to pay Nia off." Brad laughed. It was a hysterical, broken sound. "There is no money, Desmond. He cut me off. The trust fund is frozen. The cards are cancelled. He said if I try to contact him, he will file a restraining order. He said I am no longer a Worthington." Beatrice let out a wail that rivaled the sirens outside. She realized in that moment that she had bet on the wrong horse. She had thrown away her successful daughter for a fraud who had just been disowned. Brad dropped the phone onto the carpet. He looked up at the balcony where I was standing. He realized that without his father's money, he was nothing. He was exactly what he had called me, a nobody, and the weight of that truth crushed him into the floor. I walked out of the venue, leaving the chaos behind me. The cool night air felt like a cleansing baptism after the toxicity of the ballroom. The paparazzi were still camped out by the red carpet, but Marcus had pulled the Maybach around to the private VIP exit. The obsidian car glistened under the streetlights, looking like a sleek weapon of war. I signaled for Marcus to wait. I knew they were coming. I could feel their desperation vibrating in the air like a storm front. Footsteps clattered frantically on the pavement behind me. They were not the confident strides of socialites. They were the stumbling, desperate runs of people fleeing a burning building. Nia. Nia, wait. It was my mother. Beatrice came rushing out of the shadows. Her mascara was smeared and her chest was heaving. Desmond followed close behind her. He had lost his tie somewhere in the panic and his face was slick with sweat. They stopped a few feet away from me, panting heavily. They looked at the Maybach. Then they looked at my white tuxedo. Then they looked at the security detail standing at attention. For a moment, I thought they were going to scream at me. I thought they were going to defend Keisha. I braced myself for the insults. But then the most horrifying thing happened. Beatrice smiled. It was a grotesque expression. It was the smile of a salesperson trying to close a deal after being caught lying. She smoothed her dress and took a tentative step toward me, reaching out as if to touch my arm. "Oh, Nia," she breathed out, her voice trembling with false emotion. "You were magnificent in there. Absolutely magnificent. I have never been so proud of a child in my life." I stared at her. The audacity was so immense it was almost impressive. 10 minutes ago she had watched me being humiliated. Now she was looking at me like I was the second coming. Desmond stepped forward, nodding vigorously. He tried to put on his fatherly voice, but it cracked. "We always knew you had it in you, Nia. We knew you were the smart one. That is why we were so hard on you. Do you understand that now? We had to push you. We had to make you tough so you could build this empire. It was all part of our plan to help you succeed." He actually believed his own lie. He was rewriting history in real time to frame his neglect as tough love. "We are so sorry about Keisha," Beatrice chimed in, stepping closer to the car door. She lost her way. She became greedy. "But you, Nia, you stayed true to your roots. You remember where you came from. You remember who raised you." She looked at the open door of the Maybach, her eyes hungry for the leather interior. "We should go somewhere quiet to discuss the next steps," she said, assuming she was invited. "We need to help you manage this transition. You are going to need guidance running a company this size. Your father has excellent business instincts. We are a team, Nia. The Worthington family rises together." Desmond reached for the door handle as if he owned it. "Come on, sweetheart. Let us go get some dinner. We can celebrate properly. Just the three of us. The people who really matter." I looked at his hand on my car. I looked at my mother's desperate, fawning face. They were not mourning the loss of their other daughter. They were simply trying to jump from a sinking ship onto a luxury yacht. They did not care that I was the CEO. They only cared that I was the new host organism for their parasitism. They honestly thought that a few compliments and a reminder of their biological contribution would erase 30 years of trauma. They thought I was still the little girl desperate for their approval. They were about to find out that that little girl died a long time ago. I watched Desmond's hand hover over the chrome handle of my car. It was an intrusion that made my skin crawl. He thought he could just open the door and slide into my life, as if the last 30 years of neglect had never happened. I did not need to raise my voice. I simply nodded at Marcus. My driver stepped forward, his massive frame blocking my father's path. He gently but firmly removed Desmond's hand from the vehicle and pushed him back a step. "Excuse me," Desmond sputtered, straightening his jacket. "What is the meaning of this?" "Nia, tell your driver to stand down. We have reservations at the Palm." I stood perfectly still, my white tuxedo glowing in the harsh streetlights. I looked at the two people who had given me life, and then spent every day since trying to drain the life out of me. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They looked like strangers. "There are no reservations, Desmond," I said, my voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze water. "And you are not getting in this car. This car is for staff and family only, and you are neither." Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls. "How can you say that? We are your mother and father. We raised you. We put a roof over your head." "You put a roof over my head until you decided I was inconvenient," I corrected her. "Then you kicked me out. You evicted me and my daughter 3 days ago, Beatrice. You sent the police to my door. You tried to force me into your backyard shed like a stray dog. Do not talk to me about family. You do not know the meaning of the word." Beatrice tried to rally. She tried to summon the tears that usually worked so well on her husband. "Nia, please. We were just stressed. We were worried about Keisha. We made a mistake. Can you not find it in your heart to forgive us? We are old, Nia. We need you." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I searched for any sign of genuine love or remorse. I saw only calculation. She was doing the math in her head, figuring out how much my forgiveness was worth in dollars and cents. She did not want a daughter. She wanted a retirement plan. I took a step closer to her until I could see the cracks in her heavy foundation. "You made a choice 30 years ago, Beatrice. You chose the pretty one. You chose the star. You bet everything you had on Keisha. You invested every ounce of your love and every dime of your money into her. You ignored me. You mocked me. You treated me like a servant in my own home." I paused, letting the silence stretch between us. "You do not get to change your bet just because the horse stumbled," I said softly. "You do not have a daughter named Nia. That girl died the moment you told her she was worthless. You only have a daughter named Keisha. She is the one you created. She is the one you love. So go to the police station, go bail her out, and ask her to support you. I hear she has a lovely cell in the county jail." I turned around and got into the back seat of the Maybach. Marcus closed the door with a solid, heavy thud that sounded like a vault sealing shut. I did not look out the window as we pulled away. I stared straight ahead into the darkness, which was finally starting to look like a bright future. I left them standing on the curb, two bankrupt architects staring at the ruins of the house they had built. Dawn broke over Atlanta with a cruel clarity. It was the kind of morning that usually signaled a fresh start, but for Keisha and Brad, it was the beginning of the end. They had retreated to their rental home after the disaster at the hotel, hiding behind the blinds like fugitives. But walls cannot stop a breach of contract lawsuit, and blinds cannot hide you from the repo man. At exactly 8 o'clock, a caravan of black SUVs and a heavy-duty tow truck pulled into their driveway. These were not the police. These were the asset recovery agents from Onyx Shield, acting on the immediate repayment clause of the contract. They moved with the terrifying efficiency of a swarm of locusts. Brad watched from the window as a burly man in a jumpsuit hooked a chain onto the undercarriage of his British racing green Jaguar. The car he had driven for less than 48 hours, the symbol of his supposed manhood, was being dragged backward onto a flatbed. "Hey," Brad shouted, running out the front door in his wrinkled tuxedo trousers. "You cannot take that. I have a lease. I have rights." The lead agent, a woman with a face like carved granite, did not even look up from her clipboard. She handed Brad a thick stack of papers. "Your lease is void, due to insufficient funds and fraud," she stated calmly. "The dealership exercised their right to reclaim the vehicle immediately upon notification of your credit collapse. Step away from the truck." Keisha stumbled out onto the porch, still wearing the remnants of her pink gown. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. She saw the neighbors peeking through their curtains, holding their phones up to record the downfall. "This is illegal!" she shrieked, clutching a designer handbag to her chest. "This is my property. You are stealing from me." The agent walked up the steps. She pointed to the handbag. "That bag was purchased with the signing bonus funds," she said. "It is proceeds of crime. Hand it over." Keisha clutched the leather tighter. "No." The agent signaled to two uniformed officers standing by the SUVs. They stepped forward. Keisha recoiled, realizing that resistance would only lead to another pair of handcuffs. With a sob that sounded like a dying animal, she threw the bag at the agent's feet. "They went through this house like surgeons removing a tumor. They tagged the electronics, they boxed up the watches, they took the limited edition sneakers. Every item that had been bought to project an image of wealth was cataloged, seized, and loaded into a van. The house was stripped bare, leaving only the cheap rental furniture that had been there when they moved in." Finally, the landlord, Mr. Henderson, arrived. He did not look apologetic this time. He looked angry. He walked past Brad and slapped a red notice onto the front door. "Eviction," he spat. "Effective immediately. You two caused a nuisance, you lied about your income, and you brought police to my property. Get out." Brad and Keisha stood on the sidewalk. The driveway was empty. The house was locked. The Jaguar was gone. All that was left was a pile of personal clothes in two black garbage bags sitting on the curb. They had no car. They had no money. They had no family to call. They stood in the ruin of their own making, watching the convoy drive away, carrying their short-lived fantasy with it. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of absolute zero. The Gulfstream G650 climbed through 30,000 feet, cutting through the cloud layer like a silver needle stitching the sky together. The cabin was a sanctuary of cream leather and polished walnut wood. The only sound was the low, steady thrum of the engines, a white noise that felt like a lullaby after the screaming chaos of the last week. I sat in a wide, reclining seat, watching the city of Atlanta shrink until it was nothing but a grid of meaningless lights below me. Somewhere down there in that tangle of concrete, my family was likely sitting in a cheap motel room, blaming everyone but themselves for their ruin. But up here, the air was thin and clean, and the only thing that mattered was sitting across from me. Zola was curled up in the opposing seat, wearing a pair of noise-canceling headphones that were slightly too big for her head. She was humming a soft tune, her legs swinging happily. On the tray table in front of her was a massive professional art set. She was drawing. For a moment, I felt a phantom pang of anxiety seeing the colorful markers. I remembered the red paint. I remembered the humiliation. But then I looked at Zola's face. She was not afraid of the colors anymore. She was using them. She was reclaiming them. She was drawing a picture of a castle with a dragon standing guard at the gate. The dragon was white and fierce. I knew without asking that the dragon was me. I took a sip of chilled, sparkling water and let my head fall back against the headrest. The exhaustion was finally starting to seep out of my bones. For years I had been running a marathon carrying a backpack full of rocks. I had carried their expectations. I had carried their insults. I had carried the heavy burden of being the scapegoat. Now the backpack was gone. I felt light. I felt weightless. Zola looked up from her drawing and pulled one side of her headphones back. Her eyes were bright and clear, the shadows of trauma already fading in the sunlight streaming through the oval window. "Mama," she asked, her voice curious, "where are we going again? Is it the place with the blue water?" I smiled at her. It was a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes and settled there. "Yes, baby. We are going to Turks and Caicos. We have a private villa on a private island. There are no cameras. There are no mean people, just white sand and blue water and us. Zola nodded, satisfied with the answer. And Grandma and Auntie Keisha, they are not coming, right? I reached across the aisle and squeezed her hand. No, Zola, they are never coming. They belong to a part of our life that is over. We closed that book and we threw it into the fire. She went back to her drawing, adding a bright yellow sun to the corner of the page. I watched her for a long time. I thought about the $2 million I would collect from Keisha's seized assets. I would put every cent of it into a trust fund for Zola. The money they tried to steal from me would ensure that my daughter never had to work a day in her life unless she wanted to. It was the ultimate poetic justice. Their greed would fund her freedom. I looked out the window again. The clouds were a carpet of white beneath us. I thought about the eviction notice. I thought about the service entrance. I thought about the look on my mother's face when she realized I was the one holding the keys. I did not feel anger anymore. Anger requires energy, and I had none left to waste on them. I felt indifference. They were ghosts to me now, fading memories of a bad dream that I had finally woken up from. Zola finished her drawing and held it up. It is us, Mama, in our new castle. I took the paper. It was a masterpiece of hope. It is beautiful, Zola. It is perfect. I pinned the drawing to the magnetic wall of the cabin. The pilot announced that we would be landing in 2 hours. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the jet carry me forward. I had won the war. I had saved my daughter. And for the first time in my entire life, I was not just surviving. I was flying. The view from the top was not lonely as they said it would be. It was peaceful. And it was mine. The plane glided through the stratosphere, leaving the turbulence far behind in the clouds. I watched Zola sleep, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm of perfect peace. She was safe. She was whole. And for the first time, she was free from the toxicity that had threatened to drown us both. I turned away from the window and looked directly into the camera lens. The cabin seemed to fade away, leaving just me and the truth. We are taught from the moment we take our first breath that family is a sanctuary. We are told that biology is a binding contract that cannot be broken. Society tells us that no matter how much they hurt you, or how much they take from you, or how much they despise you, that you must forgive them. We are told to turn the other cheek because they are family. That is the single most dangerous lie ever told. I spent 30 years trying to buy love that was never for sale. I spent 30 years apologizing for my own existence. I thought that if I was just successful enough, or quiet enough, or helpful enough, they would finally see me. I thought I could fix them. But you cannot fix people who love being broken. You cannot save people who are determined to drown you just to use your body as a raft. There is a person watching this right now who is holding onto a rope that is burning their hands. You are waiting for an apology that will never come. You are waiting for a sudden realization that will never happen. You are setting yourself on fire to keep people warm who would not even give you a glass of water if you were dying of thirst. Stop it. There is no nobility in suffering. There is no reward for being the martyr. The only prize you get for enduring abuse is more abuse. They called me cold. They called me ruthless. They called me a traitor. But look at where I am, and look at where they are. I did not destroy my family. I simply stopped letting them destroy me. I handed them the consequences of their own actions, and they collapsed under the weight of it. You have the right to choose who gets a seat at your table. You have the right to lock the door. You have the right to walk away without looking back. Do not let guilt be the chain that binds you to a sinking ship. They say that blood is thicker than water. It is a phrase used to manipulate us into compliance, but they forget the most important part of chemistry. Blood may be thicker than water, but if that blood is infected, it will kill you just the same. When the blood is poisoned, you do not keep it in your veins out of loyalty. You bleed it out, you purify yourself. So take this as your permission. If they hurt you, leave them. If they use you, cut them off. If they hate you, let them go. You are not their property. You are your own salvation. Blood is not thicker than water if it is poisoned. I leaned back into the leather seat and signaled the pilot to dim the cabin lights. The darkness was not scary. It was restful. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life I enjoyed the silence. Save yourself. The screen fades to black. The most powerful lesson from Nia's journey is that self-preservation is not an act of betrayal. We often cling to toxic relationships out of a misplaced sense of duty, believing that shared DNA obligates us to endure abuse. However, true family is defined by love, respect, and support, not manipulation. Nia showed us that breaking the cycle requires the courage to prioritize your peace over their expectations. Your value is not determined by how much you can suffer for others. Sometimes walking away is the only way to truly win. If you enjoyed this story of justice and empowerment, hit the subscribe button for more compelling tales.